I truly believe that there's an opportunity for a disruptor in our space that actually comes in and takes the experience to a new level where people will recognize the brand.
I'm Oliver, the content director at CampusLife, and this is CampusLife's Group Chat, the podcast where we talk to industry professionals and students about everything important in the world of higher education. Today, we've got Rui Barros, the global CEO of Yugo, to talk about branding in PBSA. Rui, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Ollie. Appreciate you having me.
First of all, really broad question. Tell me about Yugo.
Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background on Yugo. So Yugo was launched in July of 2021, and as the very first global student housing brand. Yugo was formed really by 4 operating companies that are positioned all over the world, brought under one umbrella, one brand. We operate in 9 countries and 70 cities. So we're widespread around the world. That's 40,000 beds, a little bit over that. It wasn't just a brand name and a logo, thrown out there. Yugo was formed on the basis of research that was done with students to better understand what it is that they're looking for. I'll share with you 3 things that sort of came out of that research that began to form what our brand is all about and how we bring it to life. One is the planet. They acknowledge the fact that there is no planet B. We have a responsibility to do what we can to protect our planet for generations to come. The second thing that keeps them up at night would be wellness, mental and physical wellness. Kind of going through their university years. There is some anxiety and stress that kind of comes through that time in their lives. And then the third one and the last one that I'll share with you is what actually my son would call adulting, right? So you get to a point in your life where, you transition from being a student to actually going into the professional world. And that's there's a worry there for a lot of that generation.
And the 3 points you mentioned they're You Grow, You Pro, and You Eco, right?
Yeah, those are our pillars, right? So, and they all sort of tie into each one of those. Those 3 things, Ollie, were really at the foundation of creating our brand, right? Because the reality is a brand is about an experience. It's about how people feel when they interact with your brand. So for us to really launch Yugo, we needed to better understand what was on our students' minds.
And I think that's so fascinating because I remember back in 2022 at the Student Accommodation Conference in London, you were talking about branding and PBSA branding in particular, and how a lot of the branding for PBSAs is quite in its infancy, whereas with Yugo it's very different. You guys are putting brand and the values right at the heart of everything you're doing and making it very visible. The research angle for that, and talking to Gen Z is really what everyone should be doing, right? They should be listening to the students and talking to the students and kind of looking at what they can do to align the students' values with what their values are.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, I come from a hospitality background. Been doing that for over 30 years, so I understand branding quite well, mostly on the hotel side. But what I have seen in the student accommodation space, Ollie, is it's been very transactional, right? It feels and more like a multifamily sort of property management kind of environment, and I would argue that in our space or in this space there is an opportunity to introduce hospitality and look at our students in a very different way. Gen Z, they're very in tune with brands, right? I mean that's not new to them, and a lot of the brands that generation really gravitates to are those that carry a purpose, those that carry values that they share. right? So, which is why, you see folks gravitating to Patagonia as an example, right? I mean, that brand stands for something. They have values, and they're really focused on certain things that align with what that generation is looking for. So yeah, branding, I think it's very new. It's very new. I would say that I think the industry or this asset class has tried to, kind of create, a little bit of that. But I don't think any of us have gotten it right. But I can tell you that from our perspective, we are laser focused on making sure that we continue to build on the pillars that were based on the research that we've done, so that we can bring our brand to life and align it with our students. And frankly, we're going to do it with them. This isn't one of those things where you do a bunch of research and you say, okay, here's our brand, right? And let's move on. We need to continue to talk to our students, understand, what they're focused on, what they care about, because, while next year I'll be a year older, you'll be a year older, our students remain the same age, right? So, but we need to make sure that we understand exactly what it is they're looking for.
The reference to kind of, us getting older all the time, but every year it's 18-year-olds, it's 18-year, roughly 18-year-olds. It just rings true. It's something we actually do a lot of CampusLife as well. So we do a lot of research and kind of we make a big point of kind of talking to students. Something we've done recently is talk to sixth formers in sixth form colleges across the UK, and we asked the question. We gave them some of the names of the big brand PBSAs here in the UK, and said, have you heard of this operator, or have you heard of this name? And they all said no. None of them could name or recognise any of the big names. Whereas if you look at kind of the UCAS report that came out this year, we all know that students are into sustainability, as you said, and kind of supporting the planet. The two biggest changes in the brand recognition this year is eBay becoming in the top 20 most recognised and most loved brands by students, and then the rise of Vinted as that it's a second-hand clothing app again, which is one of the most popular apps this year. Recognizing that these are the things that are really, really important to students, and building a brand that is centered around those points it almost feels like a bit of a no-brainer, but it's odd that not many PBSAs are doing it. Why do you think that is the case? Why do you think no one's done this? Because it does seem quite obvious.
Yeah, I mean, certainly for me, it's incredibly obvious, right? Coming from hospitality, where I was fortunate enough to operate, build, launch brands all around the world. It's definitely obvious that there is an opportunity to bring some of the best practices of the hotel space into this space. A lot of people ask me, they're like, "Well, do you consider your students customers?" Right? And I absolutely do. I absolutely do. And I think that, our customer as a student, I mean, they're with us a little bit longer. They're there, they have different expectations. But I truly believe that there's an opportunity for a disruptor in our space that actually comes in and takes the experience to a new level where people will recognize the brand, but it needs to tie back to what's most important to them. So it doesn't surprise me, Ollie, that when you ask that question, right, that unaided awareness question, saying, "Hey, do you recognize this brand or that brand?" Most of the answers are no, because I truly believe that the experience is transactional, and in some cases, people identify to a specific building, and that's it. There it is. That's the name of the building. That's where I live. But there's an opportunity to change our mindset and not think about this as just a heads and beds and a bricks and mortar business, but one that's tied to hospitality. So I still remember when lifestyle brands were launched, right, in the hotel space. And that was new, right? I mean, you had your traditional, institutional brands like Marriott and Hilton and those guys. But eventually what happened in that industry, and this goes back now 2 decades, where, if not more, where the hotel industry identified that lifestyle brands, creating brands that are experiential, that really speak to a specific type of customer, and demographic could be very successful. I think there's an opportunity for us as an industry to take a page from that industry and launch brands that our young people, our customers, our Gen Zers gravitate to. And I think that loyalty will be there as long as we're authentic about it and we're being true about it and being honest about it. So I can't answer the question as to why it hasn't happened yet, but I will say that from our perspective, the Yugo's perspective, we want to be a leader in that space, and we do see the value, and we do care about our brand and the platforms that we're creating. I think where people get it wrong is they think a brand is tied to the bricks and mortar and the physical aspect of or a product or a logo or whatever it is. It's really not that. It's the feeling that somebody has when they interact with your brand. Everything from what was the leasing experience like, what was the check-in experience like, how what level of interaction do you have, what platforms do you provide to focus in on the things that keep them up at night. That's how a brand comes to life, and it really isn't just about graphics and amenities and things of that nature, but it's also this culture and this vibe that you feel and you take away when you interact with the brand, and that really comes to life with our people, right? And that's where we're focused. We're focusing a lot of our energy.
You said you had quite a long history in hospitality. What are the key kind of benefits that you've brought across from the hospitality sector into kind of student accommodation? Because obviously there are kind of some clear similarities in terms of, like you said, it's a place for people to stay, but there is a very different kind of proposition, isn't there, for students?
It is, yeah. I think that there's a few things, right? The technology is one. And there's a variety of different platforms out there that are off the shelf that you can use in the student housing space to manage your buildings, to manage connections with your students, things of that nature. I think there's an opportunity to create platforms that allows for meaningful connections with students that ties to what they're most concerned with. A lot of the hotel brands, the hospitality brands have been really focused on that. Is how do you create this, this really cool experience. So I think that's something that this, our industry can learn from. The other piece, and last piece I would say, is hospitality in general, Ali. There are certain things that you can do that elevates our level of hospitality to a point where people leave with a very positive experience, right? And I think that rather than it being transactional, let's take some of the learnings and bring your culture to life through some of these through some of these moments, right? Check-in and programming that you might have in your space, whatever it might be. So I really do think that hospitality, and specifically hotels, there's a lot that you can learn and take away from that industry that would be accretive to our space.
And then you mentioned before about the You Grow, You Pro, and You Eco, and those values or those pillars being right at the heart of everything that Yugo do. Are you able to kind of elaborate a little bit more on what that means for the end user? What would a student get out of that?
Yeah, let's break it down. So sustainability, right? So Yugo Eco, our students know it's important to reduce their carbon footprint, but when you ask the follow-up question, in that research, we found out that most of them didn't know how. And so one of the things that we did as an example, as an organization, is we partnered with a Carbon Literacy Project, which is a group of folks that have launched this effort to educate young people, but really all of us. I went through certification myself, right? And I was shocked at some of the things little things that I can do on a daily basis that would reduce my carbon footprint. And within this project, as an example, for each person that gets certified, you can reduce 5 to 15% of your carbon footprint. So we did this with our own team. We're rolling it out to our students. But imagine the impact that you make, right, on the back end of that when you have 40,000 beds around the world. And you begin to educate young people on not just the importance of reducing your carbon footprint, but what you can do on a daily basis, those adjustments, whether it's your, your diet or or even energy usage, those types of things. So that's a practical example of how Yugo Eco, when we're thinking about what can we do to interact with our students as a brand to help them and inspire them to make a difference, that's a practical example of how we do that. Well, young people want to make a difference, a lot of them just don't know how, right? So that's Yugo. That's an example. UPro, there's opportunities for us to partner with like-minded organizations where we can bring organizations to the table through partnerships that is accretive to our students, things like education, training, and things of that nature. So that's something we're really focused on. But beyond that, we should be having conversations with them and providing them guidance on things like, LinkedIn profiles and how do you engage in a professional network? These are all things that we can do at the local level. And we can bring partners in. We can partner with local businesses. We can partner with the university. But it should be more than like a Taco Tuesday night, right? Like where people come in and have a taco, right? and just talk. It needs to be a meaningful, event that engages our students, and then they leave feeling excited and inspired. And they're like, okay, I get it now, right? I get it. So that's an example of UPro. And then wellness through UGrow, which is the last one. Honestly, I think our space does a pretty good job of that. Internationally, as I learn a little bit more about what some of the providers are doing, a lot of them are focused on mental wellness and physical wellness. So we're as passionate about that as our competitors are. So with that, it's rolling out programs and resources that helps our students maintain a very healthy balance between physical and mental wellness. So those are some examples. I don't want to get too tactical, but everything that we do, Ollie, we'll ask ourselves, if we want to launch out a program or initiative or something that's tied to our brand, if it doesn't deliver on one of those three pillars, then we probably shouldn't be doing it. We should be focusing our energy on delivering on what they're most worried about.
I think it's really interesting when you're saying like Yugo sees the opportunity of having 40,000 beds across the world as not just a home to 40,000 students, but actually you've got the power then to help 40,000 students change the world, is essentially what you're saying. And that's
yeah. Thank you. You said it a lot better than I did. But I will tell you, I've been on this journey now with Nick Porter, who's our founder, and it's very well known in the industry, for a little over a year. And that's exactly it, Ollie. What you just said, what you just articulated, is a huge part of why I'm here on this journey with like-minded individuals. You look at a third of the population, and if we can play a significant part in how we prepare them to make a difference, I think that's what it's all about.
And actually, that becomes then very inspiring. It's such a fantastic proposition that you can kind of say to both the students and other professionals in the sector to say, this is what we're for, this is what we're doing, come and be a part of it. Yeah. Exactly.
We are in an environment now where, authenticity is a really important part of being a brand. You talk about what you stand for, but then you fall short in delivering that. That doesn't work anymore. We have Yugonauts. It's a term that we use to identify students in our space that actually work with us to create content, like real content of what their experience is like. A lot of our social media is our Yugonauts. These are students that are in our space. It's all authentic. They're talking about what it's like to hang out with their friends, what it's like to, what their room looks like, what the common areas look like, what kind of events they participate in, what they're doing as it relates to Yugo Eco and Pro and all that. All of that to me is super valuable because rather than, having that message come from us, almost like scripted from us, the authenticity of our brand comes through the experiences that our students are having. And we engage a lot with them, Alia. Our students are almost 30% of our workforce are students, people that live with us, that actually work with us. And that's part of UPro, because if you can build skills on how to, what business is all about, bring them in, teach them some things. And some of them actually stay with us. They graduate and they stay with us, and they become a part of our permanent team, right? But a lot of them decide to move on, and they move on with, better suited, right, to transition into something else that they want to pursue. But yeah, sorry, that was long-winded. But when you said that made me really excited, because that's exactly it. We have a great opportunity to influence these young people's lives, and that's what we aim to do.
And my final question is, and without giving away too many of your secrets, what would be some of your suggestions or recommendations to other PBSAs in how they focus on their brand?
I think we need to start to change our mindset from being a transactional driven industry to one that's focused on hospitality and treating the students, and by extension their parents, in universities that we work with, as customers, true customers. And in the hotel space, when we wanted to measure the power of our brand, it really came down to how our customers felt about the experience and interacting with our brand. And I think that is something we should be thinking about. And we should also continue to educate ourselves as to what's important for them. What is important to, as it stands right now, I think, these three areas will be what we'll focus on, but we have to continue to learn. We have to continue to listen. And so any brand, I would encourage, whether it's in our space or any other space, one thing I've learned throughout the years is you have to listen to your customer. You have to understand what's on their mind and how you can create a platform to enable them to address those concerns, and really at the end kind of come out with a feeling of, wow, that was a really wonderful experience. So I think we need to look at our students as customers. I think I would encourage everybody in our space to look at hospitality as being a priority. And I know there's a lot of focus on service, but hospitality to me goes well beyond that. It talks about an experience and how people feel once they've interacted with your brand.
I'm going to ask you one last question. Actually, I can see 3 guitars behind you. Are you into your music and shredding the guitars in your spare time?
Yeah. I guess my childhood dream of being a rock star didn't really pan out, Ollie.
Not yet. Really. There's still time.
Not yet. And what you don't see is you only see 3 of them on the video, but this whole room is filled with guitars. Yeah, it's a hobby of mine. I've been playing for many years. In fact, that orange one, I had the opportunity to play in a band in Las Vegas with that one, which was pretty cool. But music is a passion of mine, so that's why you see a bunch of guitars behind me.
Amazing. Well, maybe the fourth pillar of Yugo can be something around music and getting you back on tour.
Yeah, man. Maybe we'll launch something called Yugo Voice. We'll have our own little reality show.
That's it. Yeah. That's it. Got it in one. Rui, it's been an absolute genuine pleasure. So interesting, so insightful, and really genuinely inspiring about what you guys are doing over at Yugo. So thank you so much for this.
No, thank you. Really appreciate you taking the time, Ollie. Be well, and I'm sure we'll see each other very soon.
Definitely. Thanks a lot.